Gingell out of the hold of Mesco. Good snap, good hold, and the kick is blocked. Appalachian State has stunned the college football world. One of the greatest upsets in sports history.
Welcome to The Rock.
We'll jump right into some App State spring practice here. So App State is one of the teams in the Sun Belt that has, a lot of returning production from last year. And it kind of starts with the quarterback with Joey Aguilar. Last season, Joey averaged 32.8 passing attempts, 268 yards per game. He totaled 3,757 yards and 33 touchdowns, which I believe both of those are single season records for App State. How did he look this spring? Did he just kind of continue where he left off?
Yeah, I think for the most part he did. I think the thing that people maybe forget about Joey, because he had such an incredible season last year, is, he had just made the move up from junior college. You're talking about a guy who's been in this system for a year now. He's played 14 FBS level games. There's still upside to Joey's game, bottom line. And, I saw a lot of that in spring. He's much more comfortable with the system. He's very comfortable with the wide receiver group, most of which is back for him. And most importantly, he and offensive coordinator Frank Ponce are really in lockstep together. So Joey was really sharp. He's a gunslinger, so every now and then he might test Frank's patience. And there was a Saturday scrimmage where they were a little too cavalier with the ball down in the red zone, and that got corrected pretty quickly. His last scrimmage was very clean, but Joey is just a very unique guy. He's from California, and we don't have many guys from Cali here at App. And he's got kind of that mentality, that cool personality that if you know people from California, it's just unique. He's not the super intense guy we normally have here at App State, and frankly, I think the change has been really good. He's a guy that can he can leave the moment behind him, whether it was good or whether it was bad. He never gets caught up in it. It's always on to the next thing. And, I think that's his biggest strength, but he was very sharp this spring. He missed the last week with, there was a little bit of a flu bug going around up here, but, up until that point, his progression was, I think, what everybody, pretty much wanted to see.
Awesome.
That's great to hear. Talking about that quarterback room or the position. So let's talk about the room. This offseason, they lost, quarterback Ryan Berger. He went off to Liberty, I believe, through the transfer portal, and they brought in quarterback Charles Wright from Texas. How did the quarterback room shape up this spring, and who do you expect to be the primary backup?
Well, if I'm being really honest about it, I think that's a question that's still up in the air. It's always tough when you come into somewhere new and you've got to try to pick up the system, the vernacular. You've got to get accustomed to the players you're around. And our defense does not take it easy on the offense up here. It's a very fast offense. It's a very experienced defense. And, a lot of times the competition's pretty stiff. But I would say that, based on the coach's comments, especially after our last Saturday scrimmage this past weekend, there's still work to be done there. They're not satisfied with where things are. I don't think they're in a position right now where they would name a definitive backup. And it's just one of those things that's going to have to continue to play itself out. The beauty of summer is the guys are here all year. They will be doing PLPs. They'll have some coaching input for that kind of thing too. But, just to be blunt about it, there's still some work to be done there. And that's not me speaking out of school. The coaches have said the same thing in interviews with me.
So App State has a couple young 3-star quarterbacks and redshirt freshmen, Mason McHugh, and true freshman, early enrollee Matthew Wilson. How did they look this spring?
Well, Mason was part of what I'd call that primary backup competition with Charles Wright. And again, I'll just kind of go back to what I said. There's work to be done there. If you know anything about Mason's background, he really missed a couple of years of high school football due to COVID. He kind of went and put himself in some really competitive situations with some great programs, but it was his senior season before he actually played a full year of football. So, he's a little bit behind, I think, in that regard. And it's tough to come into college and try to force feed experience. So he's got some work to do. Matthew Wilson, he looked like a freshman would and should look at this level. He's got some work to do, but he throws a great ball. That was what got him here in the first place. He came here for a summer camp last year and frankly just lit it up. And the coaches said, we've not seen, and we're probably not going to see a better performance than that in person here. So he earned his way in with that day of work, and he's just going to have to keep going, keep pushing. At this point in your career, you show up mid-semester, you're just trying to figure out which way to go on campus to get to your next class, much less come up here against a very good defense and try to master this offense. So it just takes time. And, I think as fans anymore, we've just gotten so impatient. Guys aren't on the field in 2 years, and all of a sudden people start asking what's wrong with them. Nothing's wrong with them. Some of the best players in App State history didn't take on a prominent role until they were in their third season. So, I think it's just a matter of having patience and allowing him the time to develop.
Speaking about the quarterbacks and last season, we alluded to earlier, App State seemed to pass at a much higher rate than I would say we would come to expect, in years past. Do you think that will continue in 2024, or will they lean, more on the running game like we've seen in the past?
I think it's always hard to predict that because you never know what the game situation is going to allow you.
Sure.
Bottom line, to your point, App State, especially in the FBS era, has been historically a 60 to 65% run heavy team. And, other teams are obviously they're scouting App. They know what's coming. You start bringing seventh guy into the box, eighth guy into the box. If you're going to do that, these guys are going to drop back and throw it against you because that's the intent of the running game in the first place. We want to create numbers mismatches. And, when those things happen, they will throw or they will, run the ball accordingly. I think when you have a quarterback that did what Joey did last year and produces the kind of numbers he did, you have to, feed the monster, let him eat. You've got to throw the ball, but there does have to be balance. And, that's one of the things I think offensive coordinator Frank Ponce is really good at. He would be the first to tell you he's a stubborn guy, and sometimes he will run it stubbornly. And, I know you guys want to talk about running backs in a minute. As good as Joey is as a passer, we've got 4 running backs who are all starter quality here. And you want to be able to utilize them all. If you could get, 2 separate balls on the field, you'd throw it in one direction, hand it off in the other. But since they don't let you do that, you try to distribute the ball as much as you can to every playmaker, realizing there are only so many touches a game.
And you touched on those, 4 running backs. You got Kanye Roberts, Mikael Haywood, Anderson Castle, and Amani Marshall that are all returning. You do lose Nate Noel to the transfer portal. How did those guys look this spring in the running back room?
They look great. And I'm the first to say they're very unofficial stats, but I kept stats during the scrimmages. Among those 4 guys, that was where the offense was its most consistent. They were averaging between 6 and 7 yards a carry. The thing I like about this group is there are no 2 of them that run the same way. They all bring different skill sets onto the field. So, you get a defense sees, 3, 4, 5 carries from one of them. The next guy comes in and they feel like maybe they've got an understanding of what's coming at him, and he runs completely differently. I think that mix of runners and the ability to keep them fresh throughout a game is huge. And I think situationally you'll see some of them at different times, but at the end of the day, they're all capable of getting a hot hand. And I think that's a lot of how they will be managed this year. If somebody's really in a groove, let them go. And there's always somebody else ready to come in. If there are injuries, and there always are, you've got a good stable there that you can count on. I think we're very fortunate to have all 4 of those guys because they're all very hard workers and very talented running backs.
Do you feel that based off of like the game not the game situation, but like the game itself, that game plan going in might have a different starter, week 1 versus week 2 versus week 3? Or do you think we'd see the same first guy in, maybe not, the whole game type thing, but what do you think there?
I'm it's always hard to say. I will tell you this: the App State coaches take practice performance very seriously. They believe that the way you practice is the way you're going to play, and they reward that during the week. If you ask me to bet the money in my pocket on it, I think Kanye Roberts probably is the first guy out. He was great during spring ball, and it was interesting. I think everybody kind of understands what we have in Kanye, and the other guys were maybe getting a little more work. But here's the thing: Kanye was the big play guy of the group when it came to spring ball. I had him averaging literally over 14 yards a carry. He housed about 3 big runs. He didn't touch it a lot, but when he did a lot of damage with it. I think it's probably good for him to show that he's got that second level breakaway ability, but it's also good for him not to take a lot of wear and tear during spring ball. The other guys are all capable. If any one of them showed up in the starting lineup, it wouldn't surprise me and it wouldn't worry me. I'll kind of summarize it that way.
Can you tell us a little bit more about Marshall in 2022? He had some big games towards the end of the season. 2023 didn't look like that really carried over. Did he have an injury, or kind of what was kind of going on here in 2023?
Well, I'll tell you, he did have an injury in 2023, had an MCL sprain that happened, unfortunately, just at the beginning of the season, like right before we got ready to open. And actually, to tell you the truth about Amani, he had an injury in 2022 as well. You mentioned he really showed up strongly at the end of the season. He missed a chunk of games at the beginning of the year. That was more of an upper body thing. He had the lower body injury this past season. And it's tough for Amani because he is a very good running back. To his credit, when he come back in late in the season and the rotations are kind of set, it's hard to break your way in. But, one thing I love about Amani is he's a great special teams contributor. Whatever they ask him to do, he comes out and does it. He's going to cover kickoffs. He's just a guy that's a great team player. And, he's somebody that if you're behind the curtain at App State, he's one of those guys you say, I really want to see him have the opportunity to do well because he's done everything right since he's been here. Nobody can avoid injuries, completely. And he's just had it's not only been that he's been injured, he's gotten injured at a point that really hurts his progress. Because, when you're out for the first 5-6 weeks of the season, you got to come back and get in game shape before you can really be your best. And, he's just had a tough break both seasons, but I'm hopeful for him that he's going to be able to play, 13, 14 really healthy games this year.
And like you said, there's a difference between getting in shape and game shape. Two different things.
Very much.
Switching gears over to the receivers, in 2023, Caden Robinson broke out in a big way with 67 receptions for 905 yards and 10 touchdowns. How did he look in the spring, and can we kind of expect him to have a repeat performance in 2024?
Well, defensive coordinator Scott Sloan probably would not like to hear me say this, but Caden was unstoppable in spring ball. He really was. And, something happened. So right at the end of the season, we played Miami of Ohio in the Cure Bowl or the Waterlogged Bowl.
The Rain Fest, like
I've
14 turnovers or something, right? That's crazy.
Yeah, well, there were 13 fumbles in that game. I mean, there's just to give you an idea. I've never seen anything like it. And I've seen a lot of football. But, just before that game, our starting slot receiver actually entered the portal. So Caden actually moved from an outside. He was playing to the boundary side most of the time, and he moved into the slot and had a phenomenal game that day. I think it was around 118, 120 yards. Caden is such a crafty, smart receiver. The beauty of being in the slot in this offense is – it's probably the one place where routes are a little more flexible as he's reading things coming across the middle. If he wants to flatten out, if he thinks he should take it over the top, if he wants to go skinny post, he makes a read, and he and Joey really have a connection with one another that Joey sees what Caden sees. And that was what made him so difficult to cover in spring ball was, if you adjusted to him in one place, he'd just go to another. and he was really fantastic in spring ball. I'm excited to see him there. He'll be in the slot when we're in 11 personnel with one tight end. If we go 2 tight ends, he will kick back out to the boundary side. But he's a guy that you need to have on the field, and you got to get the ball in his hands because he's really got phenomenal instincts for the game.
In 2022, App State brought in a big recruiting win with FCS freshman All-American wide receiver Mekhi Jackson. How did he look this spring, and do you think he'll be a bigger part of this offense here in 2024?
Well, I think Mekhi, I think when you come from the FCS level, and we love FCS players here because obviously that's part of our history. There was a little bit of an elevation he had to take with his game. You're playing against bigger guys, faster guys. And first 4 or 5 games, fairly quiet for Mekhi. Over the last 9 games, he was really impactful. So, I would say his ascension really started later in the season last year, and he did continue with that into this year. I mentioned, if we're in 11 personnel with a single tight end, we will go with a 3 receiver look. Caden pops inside to the slot. Mekhi takes over that boundary spot that Caden was in last year. And then we've got Christian Horn, who's another very veteran receiver who plays to the field side. So, Mekhi's going to have a bigger role this year because he's going to be in that starting group. But he really came on as last season progressed, and I don't expect to see him do anything but continue to improve.
Speaking of new guys, you brought in William Foles, a transfer from Louisville that was there for spring practice. How did he look, and how do you think he fits into this wide receiver room?
I think right now I probably still haven't seen the best of him, but we saw some really good stuff. He's like anybody else. He might as well be a freshman because he's got to come in and learn the offense like anyone else does. Coach Lawrence Dawsey, who handles our receivers, is a real tactician. I mean, if you ever watch him run a practice, man, it's down to the finest details. And, I think William was probably trying to just figure out where he was going, what he needed to do in a lot of cases. But I also saw him make just some really great instinctive catches. I think as the year goes on, he probably fits maybe behind Mekhi Jackson in that boundary spot. And it's just a matter of, kind of getting up to speed and figuring out, where he's comfortable, figuring out what route packages are best for him, and just getting in sync with Joey Aguilar. If he can do those things, I think he's going to be very impactful. It is a crowded receiver room. There's a lot of talent in there. So, I don't know. I'm intrigued by him. We'll see how things progress for him. It's just a matter of reps for him right now. And, there are only 15 spring practices. Most of them are not contact oriented. Sometimes it's just hard to tell, but you can tell there's a lot of great physical talent there.
We talked about a lot of the returning production that App State has, but if they do have a spot that they are losing some of that returning production, it seems like it's coming from that offensive line. Where 2023 they had 4 players start all 14 games, but unfortunately they're going to lose 3 of them to graduation. Center Isaiah Helms, right guard Bucky Williams, and left guard Damian Daly. They do return the right tackle Jack Murphy and left tackle Thornton Gentry. How did the Mountaineers shore up the middle of that offensive line? How did they?
Yeah. Well, the good. You're right. We're losing some really good players that took a lot of snaps in there. In fact, I got to watch Bucky Williams and Isaiah Helms work out at our pro day on Monday. And that tells you the kind of caliber of players that they are. Interestingly enough, the answer to your question, how do you shore up the inside, were the other 2 names you mentioned. Right now, as we sit, Jack Murphy actually moved into center and was playing there during most of spring ball. He finished there. We'll see if he stays there. Offensive line coach Mike Cummings works his guys up and down the line. I mean, if I wasn't paying attention during practice, sometimes I would miss a new combination he threw out there. But for the moment, Jack is starting at center. Thornton Gentry, who you mentioned, that was at left tackle for a chunk of the season, he actually moved into right guard. So what you have there is we've got some experienced players, some guys who were here last year, they just weren't on the field as much. Markel Samuel at left tackle started some games last year. Markel's interesting because he came in actually as a defensive end, and we moved him over to offensive line. So he's had a big transition to make, and he's made it successfully. It's just about consistency for him. But the measurables and what he can do there is really phenomenal. I think he'll start at left tackle. Georgia transfer Griffin Scroggs is playing at the left guard spot. He was here last season as well, got some meaningful snaps at times. And then Murphy at center, Gentry at right guard. And then we've got Florida State transfer Thomas Schrader, who came in, and he is playing at right tackle right now. That group I saw a lot of towards the end of spring camp, and they really gelled as the process went on. I mentioned the 6 to 7 yard per carry average that our running backs were having. That was part of it. You're not going to make those runs without those guys up front. I think the one place that probably everyone here would agree that they need to work on is a little more chemistry in the pass pro area. But they were moving the ball, and they were getting that chemistry aligned by the time we ended spring ball. It's just a matter of continuing to work on that. I think the bigger thing that they need to work on offensive line wise is depth behind those guys. I'd love to get through the season without a single injury, but that's an unrealistic expectation. So we've got some work to do there over summer. There may be some portal activity there, but bottom line, I think that starting 5 that's there right now, I feel really good about.
Was Michael Murata, was he there for the spring, or is he not coming in until the summer?
No, he was here for the spring.
Okay.
Michael actually got hurt at one point, had to sit out. I don't know. I'd probably call it maybe 6 or 8 practices. And I think he's trying to, we talked about Mekhi Jackson making that step up from FCS. Michael's doing the same thing. And he's been working both at center and guard during spring. We'll see what happens over the summer. Missing time in spring when you're a mid-year guy is tough, because that's where you learn the most. And losing those practices, I think, set him back some. But there will be open competition. When your head coach is a former offensive line coach, you better believe that he's watching, and he's going to make sure that he's got the 5 baddest dudes on the team out there for day one.
All right, kind of wrapping up on the offense side of the things. If you had to pick an offensive player to kind of have a breakout type year, who would you predict that might be?
Boy, you guys are putting me on the spot with that one. It's it's so hard to know. Guys come out of nowhere sometimes, and when you return as many veterans back, especially skill position guys, it's hard to break out, because the breakout guys are already there. The guys that have broken out for the last 2 or 3 years. If I were going to pick someone I think can have a big impact that maybe we haven't seen as much, it would be running back Anderson Castle. He's just a big physical guy, gets north and south really quickly. Came in during that slop fest we had in the Cure Bowl, ran for, I think it was close to 120 yards. And the biggest thing there, I mentioned there were 13 fumbles that day. He held on to the rock, and that's why he got 20 carries that day. But, Anderson, back to talking about injuries, broke a bone in his foot in fall camp last year. We're within 2 weeks of the season, and he has that injury. They have to go in, they have to put a pin in it. You're talking a minimum of 6 weeks. And he didn't make it back until literally the last 4 games of the season. So people just haven't had a chance to see him, but he's a guy that fits our running style really well. There's no fooling around with Anderson. He's going to see the lane. He's going to accelerate into it. And I will tell you, if you're a second level defender and you're standing back there waiting on him, you better be prepared, because he's going to bring the shoulder to you. So he's a guy that I could see with a full complement of games to play this season. As somebody, people will say, holy cow, where did this guy come from? He's been there all along. He just, the injury really shortened him up last year.
Just trying to read between the lines a little bit. Do you think maybe he could carve out like the goal line back kind of role?
Could be. I mean, I think it depends on who you're playing, what kind of defense it is. Certainly he can be effective in that role, but honestly, all these guys are pretty good in the red zone. Even Mikael Haywood, who's probably the slightest of all four of the running backs, he's really slippery when you get him down there in the red zone. So I think Anderson, maybe when you've got that, and Sean Clark loves going for a fourth down up here. When you've got that fourth and short, he's a guy you don't mind sending into the middle of the line.